welcome to another program of Political Scope. We are continuing our discussions on the 10th Parliament and the way forward. We are in the 25th day of the President's prorogation of the 10th Parliament. Of course, His Excellency would have prorogued the 10th Parliament on the 10th of November this year. That prorogation initially, or the intention of that prorogation, according to the President, was to allow, first and foremost, for there to be space, for there to be a cooling of the heads, but more importantly, for it to allow for there to be constructive dialogue among political parties on the way forward, bearing in mind the 10th Parliament has a number of critical pieces of legislation before it, inclusive of the Education Bill, the Telecommunications Bill, and of course the Anti-Money Laundering Amendments. Those are some of the many pieces of critical legislation before the House. I have with me in studio today Madam Gail Teixeira, the Chief Whip for the government, and of course the Presidential Advisor on Governance, Reverend Kwame Gilbert, Member of Parliament of the PPPC, and Madam Bibi Shariq, MP also of the PPPC. Gentlemen, ladies, welcome.
Thank you.
I want us to cut to the chase and get directly to the prorogation. 25 days elapsed. It might be in the interest of our viewers to recap what led to the prorogation in the first place and what has taken place between the 10th of November and the 5th of December. You're going to go first?
That's a chronicle. I think just for the public, just to remind the public, but I'm sure they know it well, in that since in early June, the AFC started to talk about bringing a no-confidence motion. In the interim, Minister Ashney then presented supplementary financial papers to be able to restore parts of the budget that were slashed during the budget debate. In the last sitting of the House was July 10th, and there was no confidence motion tabled. There was nothing submitted by the AFC or the APNU, and in fact, they didn't want any sitting after July 10th because APNU said they had their Congress, AFC were traveling or whatever, and therefore our main thing was to get the money laundering bill back to the House, and of course we didn't succeed. And it's on in the last week of August, just before recess, that motion is tabled. In the period of the recess, there were discussions between the President and Mr. Granger, and it appeared that they were positive and constructive, and therefore the end of the recess and the naming of the first sitting was kind of held with the hope that that dialogue process between the leading opposition and the President would have led to some movement forward. And in the last meeting in October, I think it was October 30th, the leader opposition then said he wanted to meet with the President, with his team. And we met, the President had his team, and so did Mr. Granger. And it is in that meeting that it was very clear that Mr. Granger stepped back and allowed Mr. Greenwich to lead the charge. And the charge was magnum opus of the APNU, that all or nothing, basically. And at no point were they prepared on any giving of any issue that would make them not support the no confidence motion. At that point, of course, there was great disappointment. That was the way things were going, and then I think the President had to make a decision. At the cenotaph, what is instructive, on the day before the President prorogues Parliament, Mr. Granger is asked by a reporter, and he basically says, talks are over. And the President proceeds to prorogue, still with the hope that we can have a cooling off of tempers, we can meet, we can talk, we can try to find resolutions and allow for the reconvening of Parliament and to proceed with some level of normalcy. So that is what led up to November 10th, and of course, we have seen what has happened since with the kind of reporting in the newspapers. The President then, as you know, formally wrote Mr. Granger, inviting him to talks, and that was November I think 18th, and Mr. Granger didn't respond until this week. where he basically said, no, he's not interested in any talks at all. They only want the reconvening of the Parliament, and that clearly they have said over and over again that the no confidence motion would be the first item on the agenda. So that is just a recap of some of the things that have been taking place, and where we are at this point, where it's on the eve of the President saying he will make an announcement tomorrow on what his views are on the developments that have taken place in the interim.
Bishop, Reverend Gilbert, your views with regards to the 10th Parliament in the first place, and more so, what has happened since the President would have prorogued Parliament to this stage, the numerous efforts in terms of ensuring that there is some sort of dialogue, someone that people start talking in the interests of the people of this country.
Thank you, Edward. I have had the opportunity to compare the 9th Parliament and the 10th Parliament, and to look at, very early in the 10th Parliament, the fact that we were now faced with a very difficult situation where the opposition consistently were using their one-seat majority to pretty much do whatever they felt they needed to do, regardless of whether it was in the interest of the country or not. And so it became very clear to me that one of the things that must happen in the 10th Parliament is that we needed to have dialogue. And we have had several, and Madam Teixeira outlined some of the efforts made by government consistently to dialogue with the opposition. A lot of it was frustrated in the 10th Parliament. And so the fact that we got to the place where the President needed to move to the prorogation is an indication that many of the other efforts that were attempted had pretty much failed, because there was very little effort on the part of the opposition, if none at all, to ensure that there was arriving at a consensus and a decision on how to move things forward. And so there was a public furor, lots of reactions to the prorogation, and all manner of sentiments expressed. A lot of it one can't quite understand, the fact that people would suggest that it is contrary to the Constitution, or it is illegal, and all of these things persons have said. In the context of that, the fact that the President indicated very early that the prorogation was the best way to ensure that the government's business, that the nation's business was kept alive, and the prorogation provided that one way for that to happen. I think what we are seeing right now is a manifestation that that decision by the President was the best decision. Why? Because a lot of what emerged, a lot of the attitudes and activities by the opposition that emerged subsequent to the prorogation has revealed that if we had gone ahead into an elections in that atmosphere, that was not in the best interest of the country. If the President had taken the position to dissolve, and pretty much all of those, the matters that you outlined earlier would have been brought to null, would have been made null and void, that was not in the best interest of the country. And so to go to an elections in that atmosphere was not in the best interest of the country. The fact that the opposition has maintained, however, that they will not have dialogue, still somehow one can't imagine how that works in the best interest of the country, because not all of the issues can and should be articulated, ventilated, discussed in the Parliament. You have to sit and talk. And then the matters that should be dealt with in the Parliament, the ones that are on the order paper currently, we deal with that there. And I think the President was providing an opening, an opportunity to have some of the necessary discussions that we needed to, because we have not done this before. This 10th Parliament we've not done before. And so a lot of the discussions that needed to take place out of the Parliament, this prorogation would have provided that opportunity. The fact that the opposition has said that they are not going to talk, to my mind, is reckless.
But we're seeing statements coming out from all quarters with regards to what is the way forward, how this thing could be addressed. Mrs. Shadiq, I know you're very passionate. We spoke before the program. You were very passionate about this particular issue, the President proroguing Parliament and the opportunities it presents. If we were to talk a little, is this an indication from, like, based on the statements coming out, an indication or a vindication of the President's reason in the first place to prorogue Parliament?
Well, we heard, there was a statement I heard from Mr. Granger, which totally vindicates the President's position. When he said, let's recall Parliament and get on with the business of the nation. Now, the business of the nation can't be a no confidence motion resolved in Parliament. So that statement I took to mean that he wanted the nation's business to go on. I heard another person say, but this opposition is a government has been dealing with the leader of the opposition, which is an official position. The leader of the opposition is Mr. Granger. And so many times we hear from the AFC, we are not invited, we are not included. If the leader of the opposition is invited to dialogue with the president, it is implicit that the opposition, the total opposition, will be reflected in whatever team he takes. It's not the PNC that is invited to talks, or the APNU that is invited to talks. It is the opposition through its leader. So this position of, I always look at the relationship between the APNU and the AFC as like a hold me loose me business, you know. One time we belong, one time we sing, and one time, you know, I'm not part of this discussion and all that. Because Kemar Jamjatan has always said, we have not been invited, we have not been called. But that's not for the president to invite Mr. Ramjatan. The president has invited the opposition through the leader of the opposition. So that's one thing. But this thing about the president's, and I said this before, we were on this brink of some kind of total madness. The 10th Parliament, I've been in Parliament since 2001. 8th Parliament, 9th Parliament, 10th Parliament. There are times when that Parliament is total chaos, madness, and if the people of this country put their votes there, could see what was going on inside there, they'll be so totally disgusted, because you have little children's behavior, all kinds of behavior. But at every turn, when it suited the opposition, they would get together and vote out something, because, you know, and they don't care whether it negatively affects their supporters or not. I am not sure that the opposition, the supporters, the people who voted for the opposition are in agreement with what they're doing or what they've done. I don't know. In fact, this no confidence motion thing, when it was first mooted, the AFC went and spoke to the APNU and they said, yes, we will support. We want to see, they saw this thing and they said, oh, well, we saw the skeleton, now we want to see it fleshed out. But it was never fleshed out, it's just a line. But then we are going to support. But then we are going to support, but we want local government elections, and we are marching for local government elections. And then now we want Parliament to be called to get on with the business of Parliament. The kind of inconsistencies that are going on shows that they need to talk. They need to talk with each other, and then they need to talk with the government. And this is what the president saw. This is, and I've always thought, you know, and I think I said on the program, that the president we chose is a wise man. We chose him for a reason. He knows what he did. The thing is, we needed to take a step back. All right, we have taken a step back for 25 days. That's true. This is the 25th day. During those 25 days, even though the only sentence coming out of the mouth of the opposition is, to the government that is, we are not going to talk unless Parliament is reconvened. Fine. But we have a lot of other people. Now, this is where the people of Guyana are speaking through their different organizations, the private sector commission, the trade unions, everybody. We have, I was reading papers today, private sector commission has something inside there where they got a format for memorandum or whatever it is, and they're calling on people to sign and say, we call Parliament and have a moratorium of a month and discuss and that kind, and to put signatures. But when I look at that, how does that bind Parliament when we are called back? How does that stop the opposition that has shown total recklessness in that Parliament so far, to totally ignore that and to go ahead and suspend all the standing orders and call the no confidence motion? You know, I remember this 10th Parliament started with a lot of dialogue. The first budget that we had the budget debates, and on the first day of the estimates, I remember we sat in Parliament and we were waiting. Parliament couldn't be called because there were members of the opposition with the president discussing and coming to some kind of understanding. Statement coming to Parliament. Prime Minister got up, read the statement concerning Linden and electricity. This was agreed. Yeah. This was agreed. increase the we can give you this, increase the old age, you know, that kind of thing. This was an agreement. In the same way that that memorandum is being asked to be signed. This is a gentleman's agreement, this is an agreement. And stood up and read this thing. And the next day, that just went out the window. Because the AFC said, oh, went to London and said they sell you out on big stool. Ended up with the lives of 3 innocent people being taken for what reason I don't know. Whereas since 1978, Burnham had told Linden that their electricity will have to come onto the national grid. Since then, there was a newspaper the Prime Minister had that he was showing. That has to happen. We can have Linden paying $5 for electricity and the rest of the country paying $65. But the thing is, how can we trust a thing like that memorandum? Who is to say that this opposition that has behaved in this manner, with this, what I say they're drunk with this one-seat majority, I don't know what other word to use, go into Parliament without thinking of consequences, without thinking of what is going to happen to their country that they so love, and just breaking it out.
But if the call from the political opposition, and which is mirrored to some extent in some of the other calls, is for there to be a reconvening of Parliament,
Yeah.
and for there to be, for the Parliament to get on, the National Assembly to get on with the people's business. Naturally, one would think there ought to be some level of dialogue before you actually reconvene, because you have
Absolutely.
conflicting.
Exactly.
Because
Position.
the issue, that's the point I wanted to get to, because I think that as soon as the president prorogued, there was a great outcry that this was unconstitutional, illegal, undemocratic, etc. And the opposition has played that all the time. It's an issue of methodology. Does one pause the button, dialogue, see if you agree, reconvene, and/or do you reconvene and then dialogue? These are 2 different methodologies, and obviously the point BB's raising is absolutely critical. How can you trust this? If you go with the view that reconvene, the issue of trust, do we just trust theoretically, hypothetically? Because we've had enough experience, particularly in the last 3 years, where agreements have been made and they've been betrayed over and over again. And we've seen also in committee with the money laundering up to the last meeting in July 20 this year, was that Mr. Greenwich said, clearly, the issue of what happens in the bill is not going to be determined by this room and the committee. It's going to be determined outside by the government agreeing to the magnum opus, Mr. Greenwich's list of demands that must be acceded to. And by the way, based on what both Reverend Gilbert and Ms. Shadiq said, and that is that who's really speaking for the APNU sometimes? You have Mr. Granger, who says, at the cenotaph, no, talks are over. When he's asked by a journalist, do you recall saying that? He says, well, he had just laid a wreath. So I don't know quite what that meant, because these were World War I heroes. Not yesterday, someone died. The person dying before, and obviously maybe a personal bereavement. But the issue of, and then subsequently talking about in November 14th and November 21st, APNU press conferences, basically saying, we were talking. And it gives the impression that there was the president came along and chopped this off. The entire impression when you read those 2 press conferences is that, we were talking. And here came this big bad president, and then the whole argument they build around that, the dictatorship, all these loaded arguments to justify the fact that, in fact, it's Mr. Granger has a habit of putting his bulldogs in front to do his work. And I don't mean to be derogatory in any way, but when the terrible incident in Linden happened, and Bibi's absolutely right, from December 6, 2012, there's been dialogue prior to Parliament being convened, during Parliament, on the Linden event, a range of issues, on bills, etc. But it is Mr. Granger who says, look, you better dialogue to the president, you better dialogue with Mr. Solomon. So we have a dialogue with Solomon. And there's Aubrey Norton and Mr. Vanessa Kissoon reaching with the president of this country. Now we have the issue that on the budget And on money laundering, his bulldog appears to be Mr. Greenwich. So there seems to be a problem of leadership. Who's speaking for the APNU? Who's speaking for parties within the APNU? Who's speaking for the PNC? Are they all, because they're all the same thing anyway.
And of course, who's
Yeah,
speaking
all
for
of
the
the same,
general
because
opposition?
Mr. Harman is the General Secretary of APNU, but he's also an executive member of the PNC. And I don't know where Rupert is. Rupert's somewhere out in the left field somewhere. But the issue is that Reverend Gilbert is correct. There are inconsistencies, and one is not sure. And that's why I thought that when the President and Mr. Granger were meeting directly, that was probably going to be the most helpful thing. As soon as he walked in with his team, that's when it was very clear from that meeting that there was no wiggle room. And in fact, the style of negotiations are absolutely, one feels as if one is banging your head against a concrete wall all the time. Because obviously political parties know, and the leaders that sit at these tables have been around for a while. You may go in and say, these are your positions, but you never have a situation where your opposition is not your opponent, is not allowed to have a little wiggle room, and you don't give yourself wiggle room coming with your positions. The APNU has a habit of coming with no wiggle room for themselves, much less for the government. It is all or nothing, black and white, that's it. And it's got to be all that they want. In fact, they don't even say when they're speaking for AFC. They make it clear this is their position. The fact that the opportunity was there for local government elections, and there was clear in the discussions that the President was going to make certain agreements, and yet they refused, that they could not support the no confidence motion. The issues since have been similar. So the issue of methodology, I think that based on our experience, that the President was absolutely correct to say, look, pause the button, let's try and talk to each other. But the President was very smart. He called a meeting of the stakeholders meeting prior to writing Mr. Granger to test out the waters. Because the government then had all this international pressure on it from so-called friendly countries and not so friendly countries, and newspaper reports in various countries of the world that we had done something terrible by proroguing Parliament, and including international bodies, so that the stakeholders were called. The stakeholders then, I think, Reverend Gilbert, you were there with me, that it is a private sector, and some of the stakeholders got up and said, Mr. President, is there any way we can help? Is there any way we can come in and do what you want us to do? And the idea was, it grew out of there, look, the President wasn't telling them what to do, but any effort, any initiative to talk to the various parties, to bring them to the table, was welcome. And obviously, that was November the 14th, right, or the 13th. Then everybody went and did their thing. The Catholics put out a statement. There's now a statement yesterday by some civil society, and then the other one with the private sector, etc. So these are new developments, but clearly they vindicate that there was need for space. People may not agree with the methodology, prorogation, but it vindicates that this Parliament could not have reconvened as per norm and continued in any way that's going to make sense for this country. And just anecdotally, when the issue of, look at this, this is an opposition that's saying every day in the papers that the government is wasting taxpayers' money, we're doing all sorts of things. We had a simple bill, the customs bill, in Parliament to do with the environmental tax. Came up in 2013. This would have prevented us from facing the Caribbean Court of Justice judgment finding us in default of the CARICOM treaty. This was raised 2013, they knocked it out. So we were in court. Then the court ruled, and we have a judgment, is it? We have to pay the Surinamese company so much millions of US dollars, which is coming out of taxpayers' money. And then we went back because the court said also, try to rectify this story and report back to us, the Caribbean Court of Justice. Went back to the House, and knowing fully well that Guyana had to pay how much millions of US dollars in damages, to the company, still defeated that bill. Still defeated that bill. And so, when we're talking about putting Guyana first, who's putting Guyana first? They can't, they keep wanting, as the president said, they want their cake and bacon. And they do, actually, he's right. They want to be able to decide rather capriciously what can go through and what can't go through. I don't think the public realizes that we can't have a day, we can't summon a day of Parliament to do our business unless the opposition agrees to that date. Something as simple as that. So if anybody has this notion that because we have the government, that we're going into Parliament and that we can even simply set a date to deal with our business in the Parliament. Because every fourth sitting is the opposition business. Specifically, so all their business comes up first. Right? But any time we put a date and they don't agree, there's no sitting. And the Parliament did not meet from July 10th to August 10th, while it was not in recess. We have been in prorogation for less than that period. Less than that period. No one said a peep between July 10th and August 10th, when the government could not have a sitting because the opposition said no. No one said anything. Nobody in civil society, nobody anywhere. The diplomatic corps and friendly countries said nothing. That for one whole month, when we were legitimately in our sitting, could we hold it? But now, 25 days later, there's this discussion of prorogation is undemocratic, is unconstitutional, and that something's going to happen if this from the date of November 10th.
But you know why they couldn't move? Because since this 10th Parliament started, the opposition never agrees for a date for Parliament to sit unless they are ensuring that all 33 members
absolutely.
of the opposition are present in Guyana and will be in Parliament. If one of them gets sick and goes to Trinidad, we can't meet.
Yeah.
They do not meet without all 33. That is what the nation needs to understand.
This is the fallacy of the number one,
Exactly.
the
This
one
is
seat more.
the
It's a
one seat
fallacy.
majority. They are saying that not meeting and Parliament didn't meet from 10th of October to whatever it is. Nobody's counting when we didn't meet long before that. And the thing is that what did they want Guyana to do? Right now, from Harmon's mouth is coming the fact that financially they're not ready for an election. He said that. Now, would they have been ready 90 days after their no confidence motion? What was going on? I don't think they thought out what was going on. And the president realized that. So the president, look, let us have some time for you to think through this thing. Let us see what we can do. Because if they had met with the president and said, look, we would like to go to elections. Elections could have been gone to if the no confidence motion was passed, but that would have rubbed the government's faith in them, or by the president issuing a proclamation dissolving the parliament and having elections in 90 days. We would have had the same result. But they don't want that. Their whole story is let us embarrass, let us debase, let us show them what this one seat majority can do. That is what is happening. But were they ready for the elections? They weren't.
But certainly when you talk to people, I mean, you talk to Guyanese and you ask them to sum up the 10th Parliament,
Yeah.
the kind of sentiments you hear from them is that they're disappointed
Well, they should be.
about what would have taken place over the past
They have a right to be
3 years or so
Yeah.
with the 10th Parliament. Do you think, though, it was a missed opportunity, bearing in mind the configuration of the 10th Parliament,
Yeah.
to put if the interest of Guyana was put first?
Well, I'll tell you, you used the right word. Guyanese are very disappointed. I have talked with a lot of people, and I can tell you this. I think the opposition I think they have gone to the place where I think they have deceived themselves into really believing that the majority of our people really want to go to the elections. A lot of our people, if we have to go to the elections, they will go. What they want is for us to fix the issues and indeed get on with the nation's business. So I think the fact that people have been disappointed, what they have been most disappointed in is that people knew that the 10th Parliament was not going to be like any other parliament. People were willing to accept that we were going to have challenges and deal with them. When I think someone made the statement that we were in a constitutional crisis, I didn't agree with it. What I believe that we were in a process of change. It is a new environment. There are a lot of untested things. We were learning as we go along. There are some things that we never had to deal with before in previous parliaments. So we weren't in any constitutional crisis as the opposition wanted people to believe. We were in a season of change, uncharted territories. We were learning some things as we went along. I believe if the attitude was different. I think what got in the way is that the opposition very often, a lot of personal things got involved. And that came out in some of what you heard being said during the budget debates. People became very personal, and that wasn't the purpose of the parliament. So I think our people were disappointed that the parliament did not produce the results that they believe it could produce. And I really do believe that if we had an approach that said, regardless of where we stand politically, this is in the best interest of the country. No one can provide an explanation as to why the developmental projects that were voted down, how could that be in the best interest of our country? Specialty hospital, a mile of all of these things, hydropower. How could those things not be in the interest of the development of our country? So one then has to conclude that from the perspective of the opposition, it comes down to sheer politics. And I think the decision that the president made to pull back, to give us space to talk, that is a decision I believe that is in the best interest of the country. If we had gone to an elections in the environment that existed, and to some degree that still exists, I don't see how that would have been in the best interest of the country. My hope at this point, however, is that good sense will prevail, and in as much as they have said that they will not talk, that the fact now that civil society have indicated that they have an interest in moving in the direction that the president initially had indicated we should be going in, would somehow get to the opposition, and they would allow that process. We are still to await the pronouncement by the president regarding what steps will be taken. But like I said prior, and I'm saying again, I believe that the decision the president will make, having considered all of what exists, will be in the best interest of the country.
You know, one of the issues I think the civil society have put forward their views and suggestions and options. However, there are a number of civil society organizations that are not saying anything right now. So one has to take that with a measurement of who that represents and what it represents, and whatever their intentions are. And I don't believe they're sinister at all. And then you have the grassroots response that when you go to meetings, many people are saying just go to elections. So you have various views depending geographically, going into different areas, different views from a class point of view, etc. So the government has to examine all of that and has to take wise positions, because we don't have the luxury of being in the opposition to just be reckless. We're running a country, a nation. And so we have come from a completely different level of obligations. But in addition to that, I think that one of the things that the public needs to be guarded about, and that is that having not taken up the opportunity provided for discussions and talks and dialogue, the opposition is now jumping on a new leg, new issues, constitutional reform, and all sorts of strange things are emerging, including that going back to 1966 Constitution, going back to here, going back to there, and now talking about constitutional reform. The recent TV interview with Mr. Ramjitan, Mr. Hughes, Mr. Trotman. I've seen Dr. Rupnarayan. At least Dr. Rupnarayan has been consistent about this from the constitutional reform time to now. But a couple of things the public has to keep in mind. Constitutional reform has had an interesting history in Guyana. 1966, 1970, 1980. 1980 Constitution came about because of a rigged referendum, no consultation with the people. After the violence of 1977, then we moved into constitutional reform. The Guyana model of constitutional reform is probably the best in the Caribbean that has ever taken place. Thousands upon thousands of people were consulted on that constitution, grassroots. And it took place in two waves, in 1995 and came back again in 1999, 2001. the Constitutional Reform Committee was commission appointed by the president, but a parliamentary commission was civil society for the first time sat at equals at the table with the political parties. And the volume of work that was done. And parallel to that was the discussions between parties in the back room, working on language and what's agreement. So none of these issues that are now being found to be so objectionable, including the no confidence, which was included in the constitutional reform period, including the president's proclamation and prorogation, which has also aspects that were looked at in the constitutional reform period. The constitutional reform may not have been perfect. Constitution writing isn't about perfection. It's about dealing with now and projecting what could happen in the future. It's a process. So that arbitrarily and in a fickle way, very fickly, deciding that because the president used prorogation now, which is in the Constitution, we have to now change the Constitution. The president did this, then we have to do this. And suddenly discovering, and then misinforming the public. Facebook last night had all sorts of stories about the reason why the president's making an announcement tomorrow is because this is his 3rd anniversary and this is the time he will be eligible to get his pension were he not to be president. And people are quoting law and constitution. So people are being, misinformed terribly. But this now, the point I want to make is the opposition are grasping at the big macro issue. Now clearly, governance issues in Guyana have had a process. We are trying to find the political solution of what are our own peculiarities, ethnic insecurities, power sharing, inclusiveness, whatever, all these are things that what the constitutional reform period tried to deal with. Mr. Granger has been the chairman of the Parliamentary Standing Committee on Constitutional Reform from March 2012 to prorogation time. Ask him how many meetings he called. I see a comment about, they are going to get an expert to advise them on what is the progress of the constitutional reform. You know who the expert was? You know who they asked in the committee to guide them on what was still outstanding? Is Dr. Leslie Ramsamy. Right? You're the chairman of the Constitutional Reform Committee. You had persons like Dr. Rup Narayan, that's his mantra from 1997. You had a minority of government members on the Constitutional Reform Committee, a majority of opposition people, with the chairman of no less than the leader of the opposition. Nothing for 3 years. And now everyone is speculating and analyzing and proposing what needs to be in the Constitution. They had 3 years. So all the wickedness they're talking about this in the Constitution, all the issues that are wrong in the Constitution that they're now discovering. And this is what worries me. I call it fickle, and maybe fickle is not the right word, but it is a level of, because it's also duplicitous. It is also saying it's fooling the Guyanese people. But Mr. Granger must answer, we are due for 3 years in that committee. Why some of these issues that you're now finding so objectionable? Because that standing committee was created out of the constitutional reform. It is written into the parliament, the Constitution of Guyana. And it can come to the House with proposals and recommendations, including going out to meet people, getting people's views. It has a huge scope. So I'm just saying that they're now using the mantra of constitutional reform. That clearly, my view is, and maybe I have a tainted view of things, and that is that if they want to come and dialogue, they're going to put constitutional reform on the table now. And that is going to have a whole different spin on issues. And I don't believe that even the interlocutors in civil society, I don't believe that's where they're going. I think they're talking about getting the business of the House going and let the country return to some level of normalcy. Let's get on with our business.
But the subject that was on the table for dialogue before the prorogation was local government elections.
Yeah.
And I don't think these opposition people are being truthful with this nation. The local government elections bill was passed since 2009.
Exactly.
Before the 10th Parliament. GCOM has to get ready for that. GCOM cannot pull off a local government elections in 6 months.
Under new system.
Under that system. GCOM has not yet settled all the boundaries. We keep asking for them to come and settle the boundaries. GCOM has not issued, when they issue preliminary list of electors, they're supposed to issue those lists for each constituency of each
NDC.
of each NDC. That hasn't been done. The way the boundaries are, you can live on this street and the people on this side are in one constituency and the people on this side are in one constituency. To say 215 Cuthbert Street is not saying which constituency you're in. They have to have constituency lists.
Yeah.
They don't have that. They have to hold, all this kind, they have to, this
Plus
education for the
voter
people.
education is a brand
They
new
have
system.
not done anything. GCOM saying that we are ready and we will be ready, that is false. I am one of the people who was very involved in the select committee for that local government bill to pass. It's a very good bill, it's a very good thing, but GCOM now has to study it and get ready.
But-
So for us to say we want this local government elections, that was the dialogue. We want it and we want it now. Name a date. You cannot name a date. GCOM cannot pull off those elections in 6 months. They have to do all of that work. The president cannot just say, we will have local government elections in February of next year, knowing fully well that GCOM cannot be ready for that.
But,
We
but
have to work together in this country.
having listened to the discussion so far, I'm getting the impression, with regards to what you were saying, the opposition not changing the positions, putting some things on the table, 1 foot in, 1 foot out. Is it an issue of trying to avoid, now that the president is given the opportunity for there to be dialogue? Is this now the opposition's intention to maybe avoid dialogue? And what could be the reason?
I don't think the opposition has a unified position on this dialogue, because they're not dialoguing within themselves. One man says one thing. Ramchatan gets up and makes a statement. In his own party, Moses Nagamutu gets up and makes a statement saying the opposite. That was something to do with auctioning of
The
of
airwaves.
airwaves and frequencies. They say opposite things. Hughes gets up on the platform and says the president cannot be head of the parliament as well as the executive. The constitution says this. So he now has discovered in this period that is the case. The thing is that they have to have dialogue among themselves. I don't think that they have any position unified, because it is very clear the inconsistencies within APNU, within the FC, and between the two sets of people, very inconsistent. And that is what this period of prorogation should help them to do. The president's position is totally vindicated, but they have not used these 25 days to do any of that. Mr. Granger has not used these 25 days to solidify his PNC. He's still quarreling with his comrades in Linden. They have all this thing going on. To have dialogue and meaningful dialogue, you have to come with a position. They don't really have a common position.
So you're saying, in essence, the no confidence motion may have been a way out?
It may have been a way for them to say, all right, let's all go, free for all. Now you're hearing they want to change this constitution because the AFC, in the words of Comrade Jamjatan, if we form a coalition with APNU before the elections, we're dead in the water. And the constitution does not allow them
To do
to
it
form a
after.
coalition after the election.
After.
So we want to change the constitution. So we could fool the Guyanese people that we are independent and representing you, but then afterwards we can join.
But it brings some level of confusion again, coming
Yes.
back to the issue of dialogue, because if you're saying that, okay, you have to change the constitution, you have to amend the constitution, it therefore means somewhere along the line you have to go back to parliament, and the answer seems here to get back to
To get back to
parliament,
parliament
for
and
there
do
to
the
be
business.
dialogue before we get back to parliament,
course.
so that we can understand clearly what we're doing. So
Well,
this
Margaret,
is
The minimum that should have been done in terms of this period was, if one could be kind of academic or be hypothetical, is that the opposition, at least what it should have been determined, was that these are the issues in Parliament that can be addressed. These are the modalities. But clearly, to go back to Parliament, one or two things had to happen. You either stay, there's no confidence, you put it aside, or that you go to elections. And they know those are the options. But I have a worry in, that, because when one tries to logically, as Reverend Gilbert was talking about, logically look at the rationale for their behavior, it's not logical. Is it that the opposition, APNU and AFC, are as disorganized or reckless as they appear to be? Is, in other words, what you're seeing is what is? Or is it that there's another agenda? Is there a more sinister agenda? Because obviously, were they on November 10th to pass the no confidence motion, then you move to elections. Was there something else that was supposed to happen? Because they were obviously, they want elections, but they don't want elections. And therefore the view is maybe they want, and that's why I think the word constitutional crisis has been used so liberally and recklessly by all the leaders of the opposition. Because I believe, and I said this is my guts as a politician, that fundamentally that's what they would like, is a constitutional crisis, to force an interim government, a caretaker government, to have a national, so-called national unity government, which Mr. Granger and some of his acolytes, and Mr. Ramjatan and some of his acolytes, including Mr. Trotman, says that it may even include some members of the PPP. It may even include some members. Didn't say PPP, some members. The party that has 166,000 votes on its own merit is 49% of the population, is of no concern to these people. And therefore I'm just saying we have to watch how things are happening. Some of these, I would hope that it is, as we see it. Disorganized, unorganized, disunited, and all of that. I would pray that that is that way, because it'd be better for this country. But if it is that there was a more sinister objective, then I believe that Guyanese have to be more alert and not to fall prey to some of these maneuvers of the opposition.
But there seem to, the view of some people seem to be that election is the answer. Do you think that is really the answer? Could we as a country afford, every time we have a disagreement, to go to an election? There's
It costs a lot of money.
a cost to it. Do you think election is always the answer? Well, constitutionally, of course, there must be elections, but do you think elections and referendums and so on are the answer to addressing some of these issues?
Well, you have to take that in its context. Because it is the answer to what? The answer to what question? The answer to what situation? What we're dealing with is not a cut and dry situation. And it might very well be that some of the challenges we are having will be dealt with by addressing some of the more issues of some of the governance issues, addressing some of the issues that are constitutionally creating challenges. But as it relates to the problem of the parliament and the opposition's position as it relates to the parliament and the government's inability to be able to move its agenda forward without being obstructed by the opposition in the way they have over the past life of this 10th parliament. That may be the answer. But will elections solve all of the issues? I don't think so. There are some things that we may need to look at as we evolve as a nation constitutionally. There are other things that we may need to look at as we look at the whole issue of local government and all of these other things. But my view is that if we are going to address some of the critical issues as a nation, we have to look at what the issues are. And I believe the fact that the president was seeking for dialogue, there are some issues that needs to be addressed through dialogue. And we should not have closed it, well, not we, but the opposition should not have closed the door to an opportunity for dialogue, because some of the issues that could be addressed in a dialogue would not have been addressed if we had gone immediately to an election.
Mr. Sheriff?
No, I think that Reverend Gilbert has said it correctly. all the if you go back over the years, the when the president, Dr. Chetty Jagan, in the midst of rigged elections, called on Mr. Burnham, Prime Minister, for a National Patriotic Front government. This was 1978. It was rejected. Burnham said they were the Bolsheviks, meaning the big party, and we were the Mensheviks, the little party. Again, other attempts came along from 1978. The Patriotic Coalition for Democracy, after the 85 elections, brought 6 parties together in the opposition. And by 1991, we were beginning to talk not about just fighting for free and fair elections, but for an electoral alliance. And there were all that whole history of how to form government. So we understand with APNU and AFC, this coalition thing not so easy. We know, we've sat around the table, and I'll just tell you anecdotally, when there was some big discussion about Chetty being the candidate, and all the other 5 parties said, well, they would support Chetty. This was eventually after many, many hours of wrangling, but the PPP, no matter what votes it brought in, could only get 13% of the seats of Parliament. 13. And the other parties would get the balance. So we've had a lot of experience with alliance. PPP, of all the parties, has probably had the longest experience going back to the 50s, right through. And so those didn't work. The constitutional reform process builds in an issue of power sharing in a sense. This is the only constitution in this region where the leader of the opposition has a veto vote on the president in terms of constitutional appointments. It was about power sharing and giving some security, if you want to put it that, to the opposition party, AP and UPNC at those days, that this was not winner-takes-all politics. So the governance issues that Reverend talks about are the governance issues of whoever is a winner doesn't take all, that there's space for, and recognizing their ethnic insecurities, there's a political challenge in Guyana, a political dilemma. So this is not suddenly Mr. Trotman discovering this in 2014, another wake up.
But the
This has been going on for
The
years.
opposition veto has stopped us from having a chancellor
Yes.
still acting, has stopped us from having a chief justice
Exactly.
still acting, has stopped us from having a lot of things where he has veto power. So the thing is that the exercise of the power, you have the power, but the exercise of the power
Exactly.
has to be in the interest of the nation, of the people who put you there. All their actions show that they have scant respect or regard for those people who voted them.
Well, we're almost out of time. I'm going to give each one
Yeah.
of you 30 seconds. So your closing comments. Your closing comments, 30 seconds. Mrs. Shi, you want to go first?
Look, I think that we're at a serious crossroads in terms of Guyana, and that it requires wise leadership. It requires a very profound recognition of the profound issues facing our country. The president opened the door to allow for that. It was rejected. We have seen recent developments in the last 24 hours with civil society. The situation is very fluid, and we would hope that wise leadership is what will move this country forward.
Reverend Wilbur.
Yes, well, just to echo Mr. Shearer, she talked about wise leadership. One of the first responsibility of wise leadership is to define reality. And I think our president has defined our reality as a nation when he made the decision to prorogate, because he understood where we were as a nation and what was the best thing to do at that point. I believe in going forward, we need to as a people, and particularly those of us who are given the responsibility for the governance of this country, to really ensure, and this is government opposition, to ensure that as we look ahead, that we see the possibilities within our nation and understand that we cannot build this nation by fighting. We have to sit and talk, because there are common things that binds us together, and we all should sit and talk about those common things and find ways, even though we come from different political perspectives, find ways in which we can pursue that. And that would be my advice to the members of the opposition as well.
Mrs. Shadi?
I would like to ask the opposition members, in this spirit of goodwill, where from age old we ask for peace on earth and goodwill towards men, that the opposition so shows some goodwill to their supporters, to the people who put them there, and really put Guyana first, really and truly, in the true sense of the word, put this country first, regardless of who is president, because you have a voice. You can say to the president, look, and it showed when we had other discussions, that the president is willing to accommodate. But then now when we accommodate, then you pull back your word. Let us really show the Guyanese people that in this Christmas season, we have this nation's interest at heart, and we will do whatever it takes to work for the good of this country.
I want to thank you guys very much for joining me today. Of course, I think
Thank
we've been able to clarify and shed light on quite a number of issues. Of course, our discussions were centered on the 10th Parliament, the way forward, and the 25th day of His Excellency's prorogation of Parliament. The President will address the nation via a press conference tomorrow on the way forward. That's tomorrow, Saturday. And of course, join us right here for that program. I think it's at 14 hours. Tomorrow he's going to have a news conference to address the way forward. Until then, I want to thank you very much for joining us at home. And again, thank you very much for being part of the program.
Thank you very much. Thank you.